Welcome to Time to Wonder podcast, a behind-the-scenes peek into the world of museums for kids of all ages everywhere. Hi, I'm Ava.
Hi, I'm Lesley.
And I'm Sue.
And this is a podcast where kids ask questions about museums.
And we find the answers.
During this episode, we will be talking about the Japanese internment during the Second World War. There is also a brief but non-explicit mention of harm against children.
Welcome to our podcast, and today's big question is, why are there museums and houses? Today's guests are Johnny and Darren, the interim executive director at Historic Joy Kogawa House. As well, we have Darren, who is the heritage interpreter intern. They both work at Historic Joy Kogawa House, a museum that lives in a house.
Hi, you two. How are you doing?
Hi, Johnny. Hi, Darren. How are you guys today?
Hi, we're doing great here. How are you doing?
We're good.
Did you want to tell us a little bit more about the Joy Kogawa House?
Hey folks, thanks for having us. We're really stoked to be here talking about the place we work and get to work. It's the Historic Joy Kogawa House. This is a house that has become a heritage site, and it has a lot of really important purposes. One of the main purposes right now, one of our jobs, is we get to be a house, a home for writers. A lot of important writers come into our space and they work on the next big project, the next big story or collection of poems or a cookbook or a play. Any type of writing is welcome in this space. And the reason we do that is because this was the childhood home of Joy Kogawa, and she wrote the book Oba-san. This book is important because it really talks in a human way and details the stories of Japanese Canadians who experienced the internment during World War II. There's a lot of heavy stories that are in this space here. And what Joy has been able to do is bring humanity and, in some ways, fun and joy into the work to help it be more accessible for folks. Because for many of us living in Canada, a lot of this history wasn't told, which is kind of why this book is so exciting and why being a museum is so exciting, because we get to be a living space where people can come in and experience the history. I want to say that it's also really important that, there's so many layers to history, right? We are in the world of prequels, right? The story before the story. And we want to acknowledge that in this space, in this home, it was the home of Joy Kogawa and her family, including her father, Gordon Goichi Nagayama, who was a former member of the Anglican Church, but he hurt a lot of young people. And that was a history that was also erased in the process. So this space is also important to remember that it's important to know people do bad things sometimes. And healing requires us to move forward in good ways and make right and apologize and do important work. So this house represents all of those things. And we also have groups like the ukulele group come and play, once a month, every Sunday and on Sundays. So it's a really nice place to hang out, and we're happy to share it.
Are there any other houses that are museums?
Yes. There are a lot of heritage sites across Canada that are living museums. Darren, do you have any on your list?
I do.
Great, go for it.
So before I was lucky enough to work here at Historic Joy Kogawa House, I used to work at the Maple Ridge Museum in Maple Ridge, my hometown. And one of the buildings that they had was the Haney House. That was the house that belonged to Thomas Haney. And so it was also a house that was deemed of heritage importance, which is to say that it was very important to the history of the town, that people were put there and paid to maintain the house and make sure that people could see it and that the story was told. And that was my job. And I really, really loved it.
Aww.
There's one thing that I'm thinking about is when I I was a young person. I was born in Ontario in an area called Kitchener-Waterloo, just outside Toronto. I generally call Toronto home, but I grew up in Kitchener, and there was the Schneider House Historic Site, National Historic Site, which is formerly called the Joe Schneider House, where you may remember the name of the sausages and whatnot.
Oh, wow.
And in Ontario and in that region, there is a really strong German culture and Oktoberfest. That was the first time I went to a museum living in a house, and we learned a lot about what life was like in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and whatnot. I think a lot about food, and I think a lot about what people eat at different times. So it was really interesting for me, even at that age, to learn more about, making butter, making ice cream, making sausages, and preserving food. Uh, and I think that was also really present here for a lot of Japanese Canadians coming to Canada, for a lot of cultures coming to Canada, coming to live here, bringing food from, wherever they came from to their new home to maintain culture and identity is really important.
What do the neighbors think about living next to a museum?
They love the house, and it's a real joy to be able to have that luxury. That is not always the case because sometimes a museum in a house gets busy. We have lots of visitors, but we have this lovely little free library at the front of the house that Darren actually manages with a range of books from children's books to novels to textbooks and cookbooks and things that people share, and it's really, really nice. Sometimes I think the neighbors might think that we have just big parties here, but we do not. Just for everyone watching, there are no parties at this house. But what we do have is like ukulele groups and writing groups and readings and poetry readings, a lot of book-based, literary art-based programming. I've had the deep privilege, it's been a gift and honor to be able to tour the house with families who just want to learn more about the internment. And a lot of times, it's actually families who experience it themselves. A lot of Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans were sent off to internment camps, and they were never allowed to come back. And that was really, really hard and sad. They went to the prairies and to working at sugar beet farms, and so we've had visitors who say, "Oh, my grandparents were, or my parents were," and they're bringing their kids here to come see the house and learn more about the history, which is so powerful. So it's been a real joy to be able to have that. The neighbors are really supportive of that. So it's been great. The neighbors are wonderful. We couldn't do this without them.
Who owned the house after Joy's family?
So after the house was taken away from Joy's family, it was sold to different people that were part of the Marpole community that were not for Japanese Canadians. So I won't give you the names of who owned the house, but it was moved around outside of Joy's family for a number of years before it became a museum.
How did it become a museum?
After the house was taken in the 1940s, all the way up until 2003, Joy had come back as an older lady, and she had visited the house and saw that there was a for sale sign outside. And so she and some of her friends asked the person who was selling the house if they could host a poetry night at that house to honor the work that she had done. She had already written Obasan, and so the impact she had from her experiences at the house and in internment were being honored by them having a poetry night at the house. From that event, 100 people attended. A petition to protect the house and to turn it into a heritage space had been started and signed. It wasn't that easy that it just goes straight from petition to house. It still took a long time. In 2004, the house was sold to its next owner. In 2005, he applied for a demolition permit and he was going to, destroy the house. They notified a group called the Save Kogawa House Committee. They petitioned for a delay to the demolition permit so that they could try to raise funds to buy the house and turn it into a museum. They were approved. They got 180 days to try to raise money, and so they were fundraising as hard as they could to try to save the house. By 2006, with a major donation from Senator and activist Nancy Ruth Jackman, they were able to buy the house. It took a couple more years to become what it is, but 2006, from 2004, from seeing the for sale sign to 2006 is how long it took for them to really save the house.
I heard that there were school kids that were involved in saving the house and everything as well. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So one of our founding members, Joan Young, was a school teacher. And actually, if folks come to visit the house, in the basement is this very large banner mural that she actually created with her students. And I think they were in grade 3 or 4 when they did it. And it was just a picture of the house and just really showing the support and love from the community.
Did Joy ever say how she feels about her childhood home becoming a museum?
Absolutely. She has been in great support of it, and she's very moved by it. And her family feels truly honored because we're celebrating that work and keeping those memories alive. If you come to the house and take a tour, you're going to hear a lot of memories on tape in Joy's voice, talking about being a little girl, playing with dolls, being in the kitchen, playing outside, playing with her siblings, and the joy she felt, and also how she navigated being different. It was a really different time in the 1940s, and unfortunately, racism is a real thing, and it still is. It appeared differently back then, and so she had a hard time at times at school and whatnot, but coming home to a space that felt safe. And she has said that this house was a place that represented some of her happiest memories leading into the internment. And so afterwards, to again, just be able to spark a huge petition that saved the house, she's very pleased and appreciative of that, grateful of that.
When Joy's family left their house, did they know they were never going to live in it again?
No, Joy did not know that. When they were told that they had to leave, when Joy's family and other Japanese Canadians were told by the Canadian government that they had to go to an internment camp, the government told them that they would keep the house safe for them. They keep all their stuff, they keep their car, they keep the house, and everything will be there when they get back. And lots of people who were going to internment thought that they were going for a short trip, so they only packed for a short trip, not even packing for all the seasons in some cases. And so Joy thought that her house would still be here. The short trip turned into 3 years. In order to pay for the internment camp, the Canadian government sold at a huge discount all of their belongings and the house and the cars of every Japanese Canadian to non-Japanese, and used that money to fund the internment of them.
Was Joy allowed to take any toys to the camp?
Joy was technically able to, but her and her family had a very limited amount of things they were allowed to bring. Each adult was allowed a heavy suitcase, and each child was allowed half that amount of weight as a suitcase. And the whole family was allowed to have one sewing machine. It was considered such a necessity that even when you're being deprived entirely of what you need to survive, a sewing machine per family to mend their own clothes was, at the time, you needed it, no matter what. So each family was allowed one in addition to the suitcases. Don't get it misconstrued that is generous, because it's not. So Joy's family put together their clothing that they needed. They put together reading material. They put together what they needed to continue to do religious practices. They brought food with them because they weren't sure where or how long they were going to go and what was going to be available. And so Joy, actually, we have videos of her as an adult talking about those times. And she says that one of the things that she longed for, that she missed the most, was having the house and having all of her dolls there, having her dresses, being able to play with those things, and the cherry tree. And none of those things were with her when she was there.
Thank you for joining us at Time to Wonder podcast.
Thanks, you two, for joining us.
We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you. It was very interesting.
Welcome back to part 2. In our next episode, we will be revisiting a question we asked in episode 1. Were there museums before settlement in what we now call Canada?
In this episode, we talked to Megan Jerry, who is a museum tech at Blackfoot Crossing Historical Park in Alberta.
She's a member of the Siksika, or Blackfoot Nation.
We learn about the belongings that families treasured and passed down to the next generations. We also learn about how families passed down patterns for painting teepees and for beading.
Megan tells us about the importance of the buffalo to the Siksika and talks about how Chief Crowfoot's many possessions ended up in a museum in England.
Please join us for episode 6.
Thanks again to today's guests. Our music was written by Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons. For complete information, see our blog post at timetowonderpodcast.com.
For more information on this episode, visit timetowonderpodcast.com.
If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe. Remember, next time you go to a museum, look, listen, and wonder.